Welcome to the Armageddon TV YouTube channel. The war between Ukraine and Russia continued with fierce clashes in August, and the Ukrainian forces are entering September with a clear superiority over the Russian army. In recent weeks, the pressure of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Russian army has grown incredibly. In the all-out Kherson offensive that started over the weekend, the Ukrainian armed forces are hitting with such force that a different groan is heard from almost every target of Russia in Ukraine. While Russian President Vladimir Putin blames the West for these attacks, the Ukrainian armed forces does not stop its attacks. In the last few days, 15 Russian headquarters and Russian fortresses have been destroyed. At the same time, it is claimed that Russian military losses in the region exceeded 300 per day. When we examine reports published in recent days, we will see the damage done to the Russians by the Ukrainian warriors much more clearly. However, it now seems impossible to comment on how the Russian army will close the gap caused by this damage, because the end of the war, which was completely unsustainable for Russia, now seems to pass through complete annihilation. The Ukrainian armed forces has been conducting large-scale operations in the entire Kherson region without interruptions since Sunday night. Both the Ukrainian Air Force and Ukrainian artillery are smashing Russian forts, manpower, and armored equipment with HIMARS missiles. A heavy offensive by the Ukrainian army broke through the Russians' first line of defense on Monday, and 109 regiments and Russian paratroopers were withdrawn. The ongoing Ukrainian offensive has gone even further, destroying critical Russian targets in the region. At the same time, the spokesman of the Southern Operational Command, Vladislav Nazarov, reported that Ukrainian missile and artillery units hit 3 command posts in Kherson and Darivka, including the main headquarters of the 35th Russian Army in Nova Kakhovka. In the report, it was stated that the bridge and crossing over the Inhulets River were under the fire control of the Ukrainian armed forces and became unusable after the attacks of the Russian equipment in the region. On the same day, Kherson Regional Council member Serhiy Klan reported that the Ukrainian armed forces hit the Russian headquarters at the Sokol factory in Nova Kakhovka, Kherson region. As reported, the Ukrainian armed forces carried out a night operation, hitting the enemy manpower and equipment clusters in Nova Kakhovka, Lyubimivka, and Kherson in the Kherson region. As a result of these attacks, even though Russia states that its air defense systems stopped the attacks, the destruction of dozens of Russian headquarters proves that Russian air defense systems are useless. It is repeatedly stated in the published reports that the Russian air defense systems are already dysfunctional in the region. An operation carried out last night also hit a military base protected by Russian air systems. In the published report, it was stated that an important Russian military base in Melitopol was destroyed with the midnight operation of the Ukrainian forces. Melitopol Mayor Ivan Fedorov reported that the explosions occurred last night in the village of Mirne in the Melitopol district, and one of the buildings where the so-called referendum preparations were ongoing collapsed. With this attack, one of the largest Russian military bases in Melitopol, stationed at the Autokolorlet facility, was destroyed. During the weekend operations, the Ukrainian army eliminated 35 Russian invaders and also destroyed 11 Russian equipment and 2 ammunition depots. In the statements made by the Southern Operation Command, the situation in the operation zone of the southern region is difficult, even if it is brought under control. Russian troops continue to maintain hostility along the occupied defense lines. There was no significant change in the composition and positions of the occupying forces. The Russians were active on land without any success. At the same time, Ukraine, the Air Force, is said to have used warplanes and reconnaissance units to support these attacks. Russia, on the other hand, struck armed forces positions along the line of contact over the weekend, using the enemy drones, helicopter pairs, and a fighter bomber launching air-to-service Kh-59 missiles. In the evening, the Russians attacked the infrastructure facilities in Nikopol with unguided missiles launched by the Mi-24 helicopter. The Ukrainian Air Force struck 3 Russian strongholds in Soldatske and Oleksandrivka, as well as a cluster of Russian manpower, weapons and equipment in Vysokopilya. Some casualties as a result of attacks by Ukraine's jet artillery units have been confirmed. These losses were recorded as 35 personnel, 1 MSTA-B howitzer, 1 Nona self-propelled artillery gun, 9 armored vehicles and trucks. The attacks of the armed forces of Ukraine are destroying not only critical targets of Russia, but also Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian armed forces states that a total of 47,900 Russian soldiers were killed. In addition to these losses, it is stated that over 130,000 soldiers were injured. In addition, the defenders of Ukraine destroyed 1,974 Russian tanks, 4,312 armored combat vehicles, 1,091 artillery systems, 285 multiple launch rocket systems, 152 air defense systems belonging to Russia. In addition, it reports that it destroyed 234 warplanes, 204 helicopters, 849 UAVs, 196 cruise missiles, 15 warships, 3,236 trucks, and 103 special equipment. Russia's losses in Ukraine reach gigantic proportions, and its loss in last week is the heaviest in recent times. In addition, the cracks in the Russian army are getting bigger, and the sound of these cracks can be heard from the Kremlin. Russian soldiers and commanders flee or surrender en masse, both in the east and the south, as a result of the strong offensive of Ukraine. The Russian defense minister is cornered in the Kremlin, and the Russian generals report directly to Putin. While the heavy sanctions of the West and the increasing anti-war views among the Russian people rise, the voices of protests, riots, and uprisings in the streets of Moscow shake the Kremlin with an earthquake effect. Putin's throne is shaking as the number of Russian people who think the revolution is necessary is increasing. Now, one of the main questions to be asked is, can Russia win in Ukraine despite all these losses? 6 months after Russia's unprovoked occupation-focused war in Ukraine, leaders voicing all sorts of political lines and sympathies sparked a sickening debate over whether Russia could actually win the war. In fact, this situation is partly philosophical, partly ideological. The important thing here is that it depends on how one defines winning. When we look at Ukraine, it won in the eyes of the whole world. On the other hand, Putin is a big loser. But for Putin and Russia, the opposite is the case. And they have the courage or the audacity to claim victory against Europe, NATO, and Ukraine. It is also worth looking at the historical precedents of past wars in which the occupying country had a clear advantage in manpower, materials, and technology. We already know that Putin's attempt to completely conquer Kiev failed miserably. To sum up, Russia could reasonably still win in Ukraine under sufficiently scaled-down mission, parameters, and objectives, but aside from Moscow's wounded national pride and bragging rights, what could Putin really gain from such a costly victory? Because Putin lost most of his army. According to official figures, this number is close to 40%, and Putin has lost his reputation as well as these army losses. In addition, some of the experienced commanders and soldiers from the armed forces of the Russian Federation were killed in Ukraine, and close to 50% of those who were active in the Russian army were fired by Putin. Recently, the admiral of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation Navy was the last high-ranking general that Putin was fired. I think Sergei Shoigu might be next, because the voices from the Kremlin state that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was pulled aside by Putin and is just waiting for now. Russian commanders and generals mock Shoigu, who is unskilled and has insufficient military experience. In addition, under harsh Western sanctions, Russia's economy collapsed. The Russian people are facing a great hunger and their nuclear threats are no longer valid. For this reason, even if Putin wins in his own way, he has already lost. On the other hand, the whole world knows that the Ukrainian guerrillas will never give up and Russia will never win.